Hello, everyone. Welcome to New Polity's podcast. I'm here with Sam Pearson. Sam, thanks for coming on.
Oh, thank you for having me on.
So, Sam, you are an electrician.
Yes.
And you are a hardworking man.
Thank you.
I mean, I presume. This is what
Yeah.
people say. I've never actually seen you at it.
Well, hopefully they're right. I mean,
But Sam's got quite a insight, I think, into the fragility and the workings of our industrial capitalist nation state, which is something we really like to talk about at New Polity. Obviously, that a lot of our societies seem to be very desperately trying to build up cities of man, little Babylons, where when you look around the world, when you operate its technologies, when you go through life, you basically are protected from ever really coming into an encounter with creation and with the creator. That you basically can live this illusion, really, that everything comes from man, that man comes from man, and man's world comes from man, and that there's no need to look beyond. That's the broad sort of theological problem I at least have when I wake up within modernity and say, I don't like it in here. But you're out there and you're building its systems, right? You are working on its wires. So
yes, I have thought extensively about the moral conundrum of continuing to construct the system that I find not to be particularly edifying.
Yeah, because you're not, and to be clear, no judgment on this at all. You're not simply just, updating someone's electric in their house. You've actually been quite familiar with the industrial side of
yes.
Of
so I haven't done much residential work really until fairly recently.
Mm-hmm.
Most of my career has been in commercial and industrial.
Yeah.
Or some gradation in between the two.
Yeah.
So yeah, constructing the systems from nothing or working very hard to maintain them.
Yeah.
As they slowly fall apart.
Yeah, I mean I want to talk a little bit about that. You have a bleak view of this country, and I suppose most countries, in terms of maintaining the immense complex infrastructure which we have put in place to do things like heat our burgers.
Yes. What else can we do? Any country that buys into the broader net of the broader technological system, or the technological society, scare quotes, if you want to use that, is essentially on borrowed time. I mean, there's no other way to, and that's, I guess, a bit of a cliche, but it's true. It's 100% true. The systems we've constructed are unsustainable. Mm-hmm. They cannot be sustained. And the price of not sustaining them goes up immeasurably as we continue to insist that we can sustain them.
Right. No, for every technological problem, there's a technological solution, of course.
Absolutely.
And that means that there's more technological problems.
Yes.
And
all solutions are problems in waiting.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk more about that. What I want to first get an understanding of is, what is the culture of work like out there in your work? Because you're specific to trades, to tradesmen, to the kind of work and the kind of people that are actually maintaining the infrastructure of this country. How's it going out there?
It's not going well.
Oh no!
Oh no! Curses. It's not. It's the state of the working class, if you want to call it that. It's as good a word as any. I use the word bleak. I'm gonna use it again.
Yeah.
Somewhat bleak. There is not to get too deep in the weeds with Marx, but there is the problem of alienation, and it's a very real problem. He was right about the problem, not so much about the solution.
Sure.
And there is a complete buy-in to the culture of commodities, and of no one steps outside to question why we would need to work and work and work and work and work harder, faster, longer hours, sacrifice the Sabbath to do what exactly? To do things that we have no personal stake in, when you get right down to it, and things that are like manifestly harmful.
So you think the current culture here is workaholic?
Yes.
This seems at odds though with an analysis of culture that I often hear, which is of course that nobody wants to work anymore and everybody's on welfare. So how do you put those two things together?
I think what you're seeing is a move to the extremes. I think that and it's kind of a self-perpetuating cycle. People are buying out of this, and I don't blame them.
Buying out of the need to work that
buying
much.
Yes.
Yeah, so the government provides you with a way to basically say, I'm not, if what work means is this workaholism,
yes,
then I would like to be on welfare.
I would prefer to not do that.
Yeah.
And if somebody can make that determination while still sustaining themselves, I can understand why somebody would come to that conclusion. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Because the culture of work, I can't speak to other countries. I've only ever worked in the United States. But the culture of work in the United States is very disordered. It's incredibly disordered. There is this expectation that your job, one, is an integral part of your identity. I mean, what is the first thing you ask somebody when you meet them? What do you do? As if it is, as if the working for a wage for someone you don't know and have never met personally, more than likely, was this defining characteristic of your personality.
Which not to pause you here, because you're obviously you're on a list of examples for the disordered nature of work today. I don't want to pause it, but it is fascinating, right? That when people are asked that question, they always hedge by making their job part of some larger category. It's like, what do you do? Oh, I'm in marketing. What do you do? I'm in, X. Sure. When the actual content of their day is, of course, filling out the spreadsheet or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas you can see then with the skilled trades, there's a certain like gasping nobility that's still present, where it's like, well, what do you do? I'm a carpenter, because that means something.
Yes.
It has a specificity to it where you are becoming like a carpenter, even as the world is becoming more like you through carpentry. So there's this mutual interpenetration of world and person, which is a very beautiful thing, and it's what work ought to be.
Yes.
So there's a certain like naturalness to asking the question. It's just like there's no good answer anymore, because
that may be a better way to put it.
It's to say, what do you do? Is to say, what's your place in building this temple up for God, right?
Sure.
I imagine
at a time, because I suppose I was a little bit loose with my language. I think it would be different. It is different because for a craftsman, your craft is part of who you are. Mm-hmm. But I would say that the vast majority of what we charitably call work in the current society we live in does not really rise to the level of a craft necessarily. A good chunk of jobs are just endless cycles of monotony.
Yeah.
And they may be highly necessary, but they certainly aren't edifying in any meaningful way, and they certainly are not crafts.
No, I mean, that's... I think immediately of...
You are the human equivalent of a gear.
Sure. And I think immediately about responses that people might give, because you definitely hear it more so from an older generation. That's like, look, yeah, you're a gear, man, but you got to do that to support your family. So,
sure.
So get in there and be a gear, and don't look for some kind of exalted notion of work. It's just work. It's just you get in there, you grind to make your paycheck, and then you get out. So I guess maybe this is too much of like a putting a ball on the t-ball thing, but like, why is that not an attitude that you can accept about work?
Because you can see the fruits of that attitude. I understand the attitude. Mm-hmm. It's not that there's no truth at all to it. It's a very realistic picture of what we're facing.
Sure.
And yeah, it is one way of coping with what we all I think everyone intuitively understands is a problem.
Yeah.
One way of coping with it is to essentially shut your brain off and just say, I have to do this. I'm going to put up with it so that I can eat.
Yeah.
And fair enough.
Yeah, sure.
But that's not going to cut it. Not in the long run. You can sustain that somewhat, especially when there is this mythic progress fairy tale land held out in front of everyone, and everything seems to be getting better and better. But obviously things are not getting better and better. We've seen the weaknesses of the larger systems that sustain modernity with the supply chain issues. Take your pick. And so we've come to the point where there is a broader understanding of the spiritual crisis, and people just cannot turn that off anymore.
Right. So you see the disorder of work, first of all, in the attempt to make what's essentially wage slavery, right? So like work, the alternative to which is welfare, I suppose, and work that has no intrinsic meaning to it, but has to be supplied meaning by some exterior force. Like, I'm doing it for my family. I'm doing it for the paycheck so I can do X, Y, Z. That this has become a dominant form of work. We're happy to say
100% the dominant form of abstracting yourself away from what you're doing to why you're doing it, and you having to supply your own meaning because there is nothing meaningful coming forth from your effort.
Is this basically what Marx meant by alienation? I mean, you brought the word up earlier, and I understand alienation to be alienation from your work, and then from the commodity or the thing that you're working on. Yes. And it sounds like this is that first category.
Yes, alienation from the work. Marx takes it somewhat further also later on when she says, as you're alienated from your work, you're alienated from, broadly speaking, you're alienated from humanity. You're alienated from your own personhood.
Yes. Which
I think is a pretty insightful critique.
Well, John Paul obviously takes that up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there is that. And like you said, there are degrees to which work has fallen into monotonous drudgery. Although I would say that generally speaking, the trend is for everything to be pushed down into monotonous drudgery as they systematize every conceivable thing on the planet.
Right.
Because even the trades, and yes, there is this knee-jerk, prideful reaction if you're by quite a few tradesmen of like, no, I build buildings. Like, I do a thing at which the end result of which is a physical structure that you can actually walk inside of, or something tangible. And yes, I have that feeling myself a lot of the time. It is satisfying to expend effort, and at the end of the day, week, month, however you want to call it, end of a job, you can look at what you have made and you can say, I sacrificed certain things to construct this. And there is a different feeling to that than to say I signed off on 50 pieces of paper that no one will read. But even then, before we tradesmen get too high on our horse here, you run into a couple of issues. One is that the trades in the modern era, entrenched as they are in the broader technological system, I think bring upon themselves greater responsibility that they didn't ask for. But
what do you mean by that? I don't know what you mean by that.
Your role is direct in the way that certain people have indirect roles in sustaining a system that's fundamentally unsustainable. A tradesman has a direct role in sustaining a system that's fundamentally unsustainable. If I don't fix a machine, it doesn't work.
Right. Right, which is very different than if I, as HR manager, don't quite make Susie happy here in this situation, presumably production continues.
Exactly. Production will carry on even if Susie's pissed.
Right. Okay, I see what you're saying.
The machine will continue running, but if I, or collectively, if a trade were to say, we will not do X, then X will never get done. And all processes that depend upon that will cease.
Right.
And so every day we make a bargain with ourselves to get up and continue to attempt to prop it up.
To prop up our entire technological infrastructure that is basically our daily bread at this point.
Exactly. And it's a bit of a moral conundrum in some ways, because you have to feed your family, obviously. And I mean, I would say this as somebody who is in a trade. I'm quite proud of my trade. and quite proud of some of the things that I've done.
Mm-hmm.
But looking back, when you contextualize them, I can't honestly look at them and say, not all of them, some of them, yes. But there have been some things that I've done, and I was very proud of having done them because they were difficult.
Yeah.
They required skill.
Yeah.
They required, take your pick.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end, I wasn't able to look at what I had done and say, in the broader context, I've improved someone's life.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, I look at it and say, I've done something that is contributing to a process that I think is deplorable.
So you helped a Walmart keep the light on.
Something to that effect.
Yeah,
yes.
right. I see what you're saying.
And
Walmart is actually, it's funny because Walmart used to be like my example for bad corporation, but at this point, like they're basically nice.
Yeah.
Like by the relative changing of standards of what we should expect in terms of the evil.
The Overton window has shifted.
Exactly.
And now Walmart is kind of kind of benign.
Yeah. You want to go local? You want to go to a place?
Yeah. The local Walmart, an institution.
That's what they've always wanted. They just didn't realize they had to destroy the world to get it.
Yeah, now that they've burned the earth and left it behind, okay. Walmart has become the local. So
this is a tragedy, right? Because it's like you're describing alienation from the common good. Because at the end of the day, whatever your work is, like it has a good to it when considered in itself. It's like, okay. And I'm going to betray my utter ignorance of electricity here, but, because of my knowledge, my skill, and my labor, I have enabled a process to work, right? The switch is here, the machine turns on there, right? And I am responsible for this, and this is good, right?
Yes.
But then you take one step back from it and you say, what does that switch turn on anyways? And all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's I don't know, it's making, I don't know, Chinese crap. It's making, an abortion facility tick. It's making, that would be, I think, more extreme in that sense. But
yeah,
although
not incidentally, that has come up in my career before.
Really?
Yes.
You want to talk about that?
It was very brief, but yes, there was a conflict of working at an abortion clinic, and. To their credit, several people that I worked with refused.
Yeah.
So I was very happy to hear that.
And it strikes me as the hopeful side of some of what you're saying, which is that if it's the case that, most people live in this fantasy land, I think, where none of our labors affect the overall running of the thing.
Yeah.
Right? Like the corporations, the road systems, all of this is basically a given because it forms the content of our world.
Yeah.
Right. It's not like an object in the world. Like the roads and the stores is the world. That's how we've constructed it. And so in the same way that in a previous age, no one goes out there and is like, oh, I really hope the angels are still exerting their power to keep the mountains from tumbling and the sea from, drying up. In the same way, we don't look out and say like, gosh, this all looks completely fragile and propped up by the work of human hands. And I sure hope those human hands are still working, right? Precisely because of that, there seems to be more power in the working class, which is why I think that there's an elitist fear of the working class. Because there's this understanding that even though you can manipulate things at this high level, at the end of the day, if you don't have someone to run the wire from the source to the machine, then you're toast.
Yeah.
Or in this case, you're not toast because the toaster doesn't turn on.
Exactly.
And so there's this way in which, the example of the abortion clinic is prescient. Like, things can be stopped at the level, evil things can be stopped at the level of, or rather it would be possible that evil things could be stopped at the level of construction.
In the event of a general strike.
Yes. Yes. But as is actually the case, because the work conditions that you've described are so dire, it's the case that maybe 3 Catholics get that conscious their conscience tears at them and they say no, and they fill their places. I presume with 3 people who don't care.
Yeah. Now that is essentially it. That did not happen because our company, to their credit, did not. They were like, no,
just left the bid alone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
We're like, no, we don't want that.
Yeah.
Good on them. I was very happy to work there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a couple of things going into that. Some of it's cultural and some of it's economic. You run into the very obvious issue of, like we've been saying, yeah, you need to sustain yourself. So, no one's going to pay you to go on a strike.
Mm-hmm.
But there is also this conditioning. This certain expectations are drilled into you.
Mm-hmm.
This expectation that, things take a back seat to you being at work.
Gotcha.
That you had better be there. There are no good excuses. Only excuses we will tolerate. If you are asked to work 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks straight, you need to be available. That's what's expected. If you're not willing to do it, why are you even here? Mm-hmm. And that's, somehow, some way, I'm not quite sure, that mentality really has gripped, I would say, a good chunk of, I can only speak to the trades. That's all.
Sure, yeah.
But that mentality has gripped quite a few of the trades.
No, I see it not simply in the trades, but in the whole like hustle and grind mentality that's, oddly enough, seems to be the obsession of people who do the least actual hustling and grinding of anything. I'm talking.
My job is to post a lot about hustling and grinding.
So
check out my YouTube channel.
One of the successful creative job creation sectors is the financial sector. We're good at creating more jobs in finance, and so you'll see a lot of this in the financial community. A lot of sort of sheer and utter aesthetic commitment to an ideal of work for its own sake. You get up and you work, and you don't care about anything else besides that. And the money is fascinating, because I think the reason I think it's, what's fascinating about it is the money is almost irrelevant. What I mean is, like, in terms of this particular way in which work is being degenerating, this is not just like the pie in the sky thing, which is obviously a part of it too, right?
Sure.
But the money is only worthwhile as a symbol of how much you work, and how little you do anything else, and how you are always on, and how you are always hustling, and you're always grinding, and you take no Sabbath. And I'm sure you're familiar with
100% accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah. The money is a thing. Everybody likes the money, but yeah, to build on that, I think that's a very good and accurate analysis of the situation. We have elevated the laser-like focus on productivity to the detriment of any and all other things as our cardinal virtue. It is the virtue that has replaced all other virtues. Is like, how much do you ignore your wife and children? It better be a lot.
Yeah, it's funny. This is true. This even affects Catholic circles. Like, it becomes a kind of an in-joke for working people to, say, oh yeah, I haven't seen my kids in a while. And this is only like superficially a complaint. It's in fact a boast.
Yeah. It's some sort of cousin of the humble brag, I suppose.
Yeah. So it seems like there's this imitation of the very machines that are replacing us.
Yeah, it's an imitation, and it is being actualized more and more as we speak.
Yeah.
If they could make a robot to do what I do, they absolutely would.
Oh, totally.
And one day maybe they will. But bricklayers are already on the docket as our truck drivers.
Yeah. No,
it's and now I do not know the name of the program, so you'll have to forgive me. I should have figured this out.
So
but
put it below.
Yeah. But link in the description. But there is a system that they are now rolling out in certain places that I'm not entirely sure how it works, because I've never worked anywhere that actually implemented it. But I have heard of it being implemented, or talked about being implemented.
Yeah.
And it is essentially a way to track your production versus a baseline average. Okay. So they would get your, I suppose, median productivity and through some number of variables, and then they would be able to chart based on progress reports, or seeing what you have done and recording it and adding it to some spreadsheet somewhere.
Yeah.
And measure and see if you have reached the production to which you are capable of reaching.
That's right.
Are you operating at peak efficiency?
Right.
Or is there some reason that you are not operating at peak efficiency? Rendering you effectively a machine, although they have not replaced you with a machine, they will make you one.
Right. This seems to be something people are confused about, because they have this idea. It's a very romantic idea, and I think I was prey to it for a while. So I'm, no harm, no foul here. But it's the idea that the way that things get mechanized and automated is that you have a human workforce that's sort of chugging along, using its skills, happily conversing, and then some scientist over here who's just thinking up this machine that can do it all better. Yep. And then at some point, the scientist figures it out and he says, "Sorry, factory, we don't need 30 of you guys. We've got this machine." It's close, but it's not the truth. So what happens is, what's actually happened in the history of the Industrial Revolution is that the first thing that happens is that habits are put in place to automate the motions of people. So long before there's any machines, you have the division of labor, right? So you say, okay, you're no longer going to have an integrated task where you create something or even a significant amount of something. You simply do this repeated task over and over again, and then this person does this part of it, and this person does that part of it, and you're all alienated from the actual commodity that's being produced. But precisely because your work has become drudgery, now it's capable of being seen as a system of repeatable parts, which through the use of fossil fuels then can it creates the necessary conditions for imagining an actual machine. So in short, people have to first become machines in order to be efficaciously replaced by a machine. This is the actual
You'd have to automate the process in order to come up with a machine that can do an automated process.
Exactly.
And you see where they skipped the middle point, the Luddites smashed all the looms. So,
right, exactly. And so I see this interesting thing happening in the work culture that you're speaking about, which is that we've basically set the machine as the standard. And people have not just submitted to this out of necessity, but they have actually habituated themselves to saying, I want to be like that gold standard. I want to be like the machine. So the same kind of, this is the tough part about society, is it always kind of rises and falls together. And there's unfortunately not a lot of bad guys without many, 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 many bad guys, or at least weak guys. And in this case, it's like that same motivation that's present in the one who wants to track all of your movements and compare them to some baseline efficiency that they're setting, is in fact the same motivation that's having that person say, I get in there and I hustle and I grind and I succeed and I'm the best, because they're both striving for an optimum, which is not set by the standards of man, but by the standards of production itself, the machine itself.
And there is, and it is bound up in this idea, I'm sure, of saying, well, I am irreplaceable. I go in, I do this, I work hard, I work long hours, I am important. I am fundamentally irreplaceable. And for now, perhaps, but
well, this is a little bit of a sidetrack, but this was what all the humanities people thought before. What was the AI thing they made? Chat something. Chatbot.
What is it? GPT? GPT?
Yeah. So the humanities folks who knew all this stuff about the world because we read all the books and write papers about it said, well, this can't happen to us because we are irreplaceable. We write, we think, we string words together. And of course, we now know that the same thing that we have been essentially afflicting on the working class for hundreds of years has now come home to roost and is now happily afflicting the academic class, such as they are. I mean, it's really fascinating. At this point, schools are irrelevant because 90% of people can use AI to fake some mediocre assignment. But I bring this up because what the process is actually the same. It's just that we don't want to believe it, right? Which is that you have to be involved in an inhuman and sort of an inhuman mode of drudgery in order to be the successful object of automation. And so we know this with all of the trades. We know this with all the sort of physical aspects of production, but we never believed that we could become so boring in the humanities, so rote in writing, so completely predictable in terms of like political papers and responses, so absolutely like drudges of the word, that the word itself would be available to a robotic automation. I mean, we deserved this. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
We deserve this. And now it's a weird world because basically we have done through a kind of automating process. We've established the conditions which for most of humanity were very normal, which is that only a few people, a very small percentage were doing any kind of academic or intellectual work. So it's almost like the pretense is over in some ways. It's like you'll have thought and then you'll have robots. I guess that's the world we paid for. I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyways, that's just to say that we're no one is immune.
No, there is no immunity. Eventually, we will have a fully automated society in which man is an optional. It's like will be downloadable content.
Well, that's the ideal, right? I mean, I was reading something where I forget the percentage, and I really apologize. It was I believe over half of things that happen on the internet are actually robotic. So they're automated processes. There's robots that don't know that other robots are robots talking to each other. And so so in that little image, right, you get the idea, and it's actually for me a very hopeful idea, that at some point the internet just becomes robots talking to each other and everyone just looks a little bit to the right and is free just because of that very fact. It can go on,
It'd be like the end of the Martian Chronicles where
I don't know.
It's a series of, I guess it is a book, but it's a series of vignettes, I guess, by Ray Bradbury about Mars, and they colonize and build this very technologically advanced society, and then everyone leaves, and the last bit of the book is describing these automated processes continuing, but no one's there.
WALL-E is my framework. It shows you how
excellent
how highbrow I am.
I love WALL-E. 100 yes.
So the work culture,
a scathing indictment of late capitalist materialism.
No, it's really great. It's just sad that,
and I mean that unironically. I love that movie.
No, it's fantastic. It's fantastic. It's weird. Like the arts succeed precisely as typically as critical of status quo society, and so it's just very weird that we have. And maybe it's just to be expected that it's like this outlet for critique, so we can all go to the movies. Well, we can't go to the movies anymore, but back when we could go to the movies,
back in the day,
and we'd watch a critique of the very society we live in, and then we go back. But anyways, you're saying that work is degraded in these senses, right? It no longer is something that people identify with as persons, and it is beset by a kind of imitation of the machine, both from above and from below, in terms of people's motivation and also in terms of people's expectation. And so it seems like the successful person in this environment is kind of a psychopath. Like the person who does best in this environment is the person that can most successfully say, I don't care about anything else. I don't have ties to family. I don't have geographic location. I am willing to not have a conscience, like to not think in particular, but to simply to simply be moved by other forces to do whatever works in front of me.
So there's a couple of things to unpack in what you just said that are quite true, that I've noticed in my career, which I think I've been in electrical work for almost 11 years this year. The yes, a hard yes, and this is why it's such a crisis, and it's near and dear to my heart, because for everything I'm saying, I hope none of this comes off like I don't very much love my fellow tradesmen and my fellow workers. I love them very much, and that's why I care so much about this. It's heartbreaking to see the multi-tiered crisis in this class and in these people's lives, as they attempt to bend and contort themselves into a shape they are not meant to be in, to fulfill goals they're not meant to fulfill, for people who don't care about them, and for a system that 100% doesn't care about them. I would be interested. I don't have the number, but I would be interested to see the divorce rate.
Sure.
Because I can tell you that it is not uncommon at all.
Yeah.
I would be interested to see all of these metrics. Because it is simply not, unless you are, I guess, it's not completely impossible, but I would say on balance, it is not conducive to maintaining healthy relationships, to attempt to fit yourself into the mold that you're expected to take. And I mean, I've noticed it over time, just anecdotally. There seems to be a large percentage of these problems. Substance abuse is another problem.
Sure.
And then the the bane of my existence, the seeming out of nowhere multiplication of travel jobs. Where, as you were saying, I have no geographic ties. It's getting to be that way. Trades, it used to be, I suppose, that you worked for a local contractor who did local work for a particular community. Now, contractors, like I suppose everything else, have gotten larger and larger and larger, and their scope of work has grown larger and larger and larger, to the point that you could theoretically, as a tradesman, work for a company headquartered 7 states away, and be sent to another state 7 states away in the opposite direction.
Right.
And I guess in a way that's unavoidable. As the scopes of these jobs gets larger and larger and larger, as we build bigger and bigger things. How do you marshal the army of labor that is needed to build that?
Yeah.
Well, you draw from a bigger pool.
Right.
And what is the biggest pool you can draw from? Everywhere.
Yeah.
So you have these large corporations dragging a net across as much territory as they can conceivably do it to, and pulling people from all over to go to communities that they don't know, don't understand, and don't care about, to build things that they don't need.
Right.
And that seems to have been, it seems to be a trend. I've noticed, and like I said, I have no numbers. It's just noticing that there, the amount of jobs I see that are requiring 50 to 100% travel have consistently gone up. There is this greater and greater expectation that you will not set down roots, that you will pick up and you will move, that you will go where you're needed. And I think this afflicted other trades earlier than mine.
Sure.
I know welders have that issue quite a bit. I've talked to several welders, and if you want to actually make a good living welding, you are going to travel. You are going to pipelines. You're going to wellheads. You're going to move, and you're going to do it seasonally because the work isn't all year.
Yeah. You know, it's fascinating. Everything you're discussing, it just sounds like you're describing the army. You mean, you use the term, the army of laborers, but I'll just briefly bring up what struck me. Number one, that it has to grow as the kind of imperial ambitions of people grows, that the workforce is increasingly beset by problems like substance abuse, divorce, suicide, which does afflict the military, and that there is a kind of essential disconnect of people from the common good. So in the military, there's a sense that you serve, you protect and defend the Constitution from enemies, foreign and domestic, but that's an abstract commitment, and essentially, like this war or this conflict, you have no particular commitment to beyond the fact that it's what was decided and you're getting paid to do it, right?
Yeah.
And that you need the work. So it seems like what you're seeing happening to the trades now is sort of prefigured in the militarization of our culture. And I'm not prefigured. It's just, I think, an aspect of the militarization of the culture, and I think this even goes to the kind of attitude that's expected of laborers now, of especially trades, but I think laborers generally, which is a kind of extreme of commitment and an extreme pride in one's like physical capacity for performing the job without any kind of intellectual investigation to whether the job is worth performing. It's like, that's how I would have basically described like an army guy. No, maybe not every army guy, not my dad, for instance, but but there's this ideal, right? Like, you know, when army people get together, they always have some other part of the army that fulfills this, that they're just like the meatheads that like they don't know, they're really strong and really dumb, and that's perfect. That's what you want in a soldier. But it seems like that ideal in the military has sort of trickled down into culture at large and kind of blurred that line between citizen and soldier. Because if you're doing what you say you're doing, which is upholding the physical infrastructure by which we survive as a country, if that's in fact the case, which I still want you to talk more about, but if that's the case, then, you know, you're kind of splitting hairs to say that that's different than affecting our survival through the destruction of enemies.
Yes. No, that I think that's correct. I think in some ways we've all been drafted, whether we like it or not, because yes, it is an element of, I guess you could say, national security to marshal the necessary number of people to sustain the basic infrastructure that allows the nation to continue operating. Yeah, and it is treated as such. Now, they can't directly coerce you, right, but they have constructed soft power systems to do that for them.
Like what?
Well, the most obvious one is the idea that you need the money. Yeah. You need currency to exchange for basic goods. Yeah. But even then, I would say that's not enough. At one time, I'm sure it was. But not to get too cliche, but selling you things you don't need, you know, to continue manufacturing desires so that you need more, so that they can get you to work longer.
Totally.
Because if you pared down your desires and learn to live with less, you wouldn't need to work more. It's only when you believe you need what you can't have or don't have the money to get that you feel this desire to forego basic goods like family or setting down roots to get it.
Yeah. You're describing what I think a lot of people feel about the working class in America, which is that, you know, obviously there's this turn within conservative politics to like take that mantle up. We're now the working class party. We're the working class people. But it's obviously a scarcely concealed disdain for the actual habits of the working class.
Oh, it is complete cynical politicking, and it's insulting.
Sure.
And yeah, I have strong opinions about this.
but it seemed to me that like there's sort of a unified thing that happens that you've just described. I think I'm just trying to put some meat onto it, which is that why is it that the people whom we consider to be the working class and the poorer class are utterly unlike the romantic vision that the sort of conservative politicking presents, right? Which, you know, watch any campaign ad. Okay, so it's a noble person who lives for his family, who has values from an older America and is applying them today, et cetera, who's sort of patriotic, et cetera. And what he's actually doing is he's on his phone all the time. I mean, you can talk about what we're actually doing. It's a constant stream of advertisement of products, and the poor are the most likely to be high consumers of advertisement, of constant advertisement.
Yeah. Illich, they can't filter it out. There's no way to escape it.
Illich makes
captive audience.
Illich makes this point. Yeah, it's why whenever you go to a place that you have to be, there's a TV there. Like,
yeah. Oh yeah.
You're like at the DMV and it's like,
yeah, it's TV glaring at you. You can't escape.
Illich makes this point that what wealth looks like in a industrial society, especially, I mean, it's talking about our own, is not the massive use of everything. It's not massive amounts of consumption. It's the freedom and ability to not use everything, to not constantly be consuming, to live somewhere where you're not underneath a giant flashing advertisement. And we have this idea that what wealth looks like always has to be translated into kind of accessibility, availability, everything else. It's actually precisely the opposite. Poverty in America is a excessive availability to everyone, marketing everything all the time to you. I mean, this seems obvious to me.
Yes.
And so the kind of conservative takeover of the working class wants to make them this like hero of a bygone era, so that it can fit with like the sort of basic moralistic categories that drive conservatism. But meet these people,
Yeah.
And
Well, there's no interest in that.
Yeah.
Then you would have to confront everything face to face. I do find it interesting that they have finally figured out that they can pander to the working class and combine it with the neoliberal policies that exploit the working class, and it's just a 100% win for them.
Yeah, no, they're doing great.
Doing a great job.
You make them greedy as possible. You make them as beset by a vision of something they don't have, but then you also maintain them in a relative lack, so that unlike others, they have to work for it.
Exactly.
They have to work for it. Yeah.
And it, like I said, it's insulting. It's exploitative on the face of it.
Yeah.
Really. And it betrays a cynicism and a genuine lack. Not that I think anybody actually thought they cared, but they really don't. They have nothing but disgust for these people. They don't love them. They don't care about them. Mm-hmm. They are a means to an end. Mm-hmm. That end being the betterment of whoever is using them. And it's a sad state, because there really is a crisis. These people are able to be brought in to these coalitions because they can sense that there is something wrong, that things are not meant to be this way. It's just that they're not being offered any actual solutions. And because there's no interest or money in a solution,
Right. I think this is why the popes sort of started talking about poverty as spiritual poverty by the pontificate of John Paul II. He was always very insistent that whenever he named poverty, he would talk about poverty in terms of the lack of the ability to fulfill material needs. And then immediately we would say, but there's a spiritual poverty that's just as important.
They are inseparable.
Yeah.
They are absolutely inseparable.
And I think we have a great spiritual poverty in which, because you've heard this talking point, I'm sure, which many people will say, well, look at the country. What's wrong with it? In America, the poor are fat, right? This is the standard line. I've heard it ever since I was a kid.
Sure.
And so what makes America so great?
Poor people in America have smartphones.
They have smartphones. Exactly. They have smartphones and they're fat. And this is somehow, I think, held up as unlike other countries in which poverty involves the actual lack of the ability.
But notice that as the poor, as smartphones multiply among the poor and all of their public schools get tablets, the Silicon Valley elites send their kids to Waldorf schools where all the toys are made of natural wood and you're not allowed to look at a screen.
Right. No, it's exactly right. It's like, it is true that in terms of the material acquisition of more stuff, we have quite a system for providing that. But it's also true that the kind of stuff that we allow our poor to accrue is precisely the stuff that makes them fat. No, and I'm saying fat in the sense of I'm pointing out the obvious, right? That it's a unhealthy
things
state.
that are fundamentally unhealthy. Yeah. It's not, it shouldn't really be a point of bragging to say, oh, in America, we feed poor people really awful stuff and it makes them unhealthy and they die of heart disease. Progress.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's that we monetize poverty, right? It becomes a way of creating a certain market of goods that can be sold at a much cheaper rate.
Yeah, it is its own market.
And this goes back to that initial question of, well, if this is true, that work today is beset by this workaholic attitude, and if it's true that it's creating in people a kind of displacement and alienation from all the basic goods of life that you would hope for people, why is it that we have this at the same time, seemingly a culture of extreme laziness. Everything people point to, and they say people don't want to work. We all are willing to jump on welfare. And you already answered this in terms of the movement to extremes, right? Which is like, if as a person the options are increasingly whittled down to like work like a slave, or like work like a slave, work like a white collar person, or don't do anything at all and take the government check, you might very well take the government check. So yeah, I admit that that's part of the solution to this mystery. But the other thing is that there's a call it a structural reason for the maintenance of a non-working population, which is basically that production needs consumption.
Yes.
And what we have been doing, it seems increasingly, is maintaining a class of people in a unnatural state, which is basically like, you're not going to work. Maybe we should back up a sec. Work is good, right?
Yes.
Work is healthy. In fact,
people are meant to work.
Yeah. To not work is to flirt with mental disorder.
Yes. I've never met anybody who sat at home all the time and was like, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is the craziest part about this system, which is like, we all know that the result is disordered. And yet we all are willing to say, well, working with the hope and the dream of never having to work again is somehow ordered. It's like, no. Like, if the result is disordered, then the means of attaining it is obviously disordered. We can't just. Okay.
They wonder why everybody has ceased to enter why I say everybody, why a large number of people have ceased to enter the workforce. Well, you told everybody that the point of working was to reach a point where you didn't have to. Right. But now that point is like right over here.
Yeah.
And work looks like it really sucks. So let's just skip that part. Totally. And we can get to the part where we don't do it.
Yeah. What's work for? It's for just carving out through the force of your will that little bit of time where you can smoke weed and play Xbox.
Exactly.
So
if you could just smoke weed and play Xbox,
I'm there.
Just do that. Like, especially now as all of the substructures that, I mean, they haven't been there for a while, but we were coasting on fumes that were encouraging people to go forth and have families and set down roots. We finally, I guess, collectively realized that we cut that tree at the root, and it is fully shriveled and died now. And so nobody feels that particular motivation doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
So if you're just going to be on your own, or you're just going to be with one other person that you have happened to have met, but you will not have a family, why wouldn't you smoke weed and play Xbox?
Right.
And you can do that together.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's social. Yeah. And it strikes me that, I'm thinking of Foucault here. So he basically sees this as the maintenance of a permanent underclass that, in the absence of Christianity, in the absence of, well, he probably doesn't believe in this, but it seems to me that in the absence of a common pursuit of an agreed upon good, like we're all after something here, it's actually very helpful to those people that do want to be good, not for its own sake, not for love of God, but to be normal and to fit in and to be superior to others. It doesn't really work if everyone is at the same social station, right? Because so what you do is you maintain a class as the constant reference point. So it's like, you don't want to become them, right?
Sure.
So you want to create a bunch of people whose lives are obviously sad and who they survive, right? They but a specifically unhealthy manner, in order to enforce certain behaviors of another class by hanging a threat over them, which is basically, well, you don't want to become like them, right? You don't want to drop out into this. And so it has this kind of social utility to maintain an underclass in terms of the establishment of norms in upper classes.
Yes. How do you establish what's respectable? Well, first you have to have a reference point of what's unrespectable.
Right. Which, like, as long as you all actually believe in God, you don't need to worry about these sorts of systems, because you can say, well, I mean, don't know about respectable, but what I ought to do is obey his commandments and get to heaven, right? But where that's absent, it kind of rises up and takes the place. It's like, well, I don't know what I'm good for. I don't know what human life is for. I don't know if I'm going anywhere when I die, but I sure don't want to be that guy, right? So
effectively, yes.
And I also think there's just a very practical element that the maintenance of a non-working class creates a lot of jobs. right? It creates a lot of therapists. It creates a lot of professions that administer to them. It builds up its own structure of care, as it were,
Yep.
that is entirely devoted to extrinsically and remedially maintaining an unhealthy life, a disordered life in existence, right? Because like we said, if there was nothing else going on, to just stop a class of people from working would involve obvious social problems. I mean, I don't know if you've met a male above the age of like 15, but they should work, I think.
They need something to do.
So the trick then is to create a population of people who are in that unnatural condition, and so you're basically risking violence within your society. You're risking disorder within your society, and what that creates is a whole regime of care work that is kept in place by the constant need. You're constantly producing the need of management of a class, and so it's this weird and very vampiristic situation where an entire management class kind of relies on a jobless and hopeless class, really, in order to keep its job,
keep going.
Yeah. No, it's always relational, isn't it? Right? It's always, we kind of live and fall together. We rise and fall together.
Yeah, ultimately we're all in it together, whether we like it or not.
So tell me a little more about the systems that uphold our country, our way of life, our world. Do you really think it's as unsustainable as you say?
I do. I absolutely do. Not only do I think it's unsustainable, I think it is prone to an immediate catastrophic collapse at any moment.
Why?
We live, every moment we live is a moment at which we have rolled the dice and not failed yet. And I don't, sorry, this will be a bit of a tangent. I don't think people understand how fragile, how dangerous the status quo is. The resting existence of just being alive in I'll just to say the United States, but in the broader industrialized world, it does not matter where you live. The very act of existing at any given moment is fraught with peril. And I say people don't realize it, but I think maybe somewhere they do. The steady uptick of nervous disorders, there's something to that. That's not accidental. I don't think they're ever diagnosed. I think it's real. And I think part of it is this internalized sense that we are in actual, real danger all the time. And the only thing protecting us is people who we do not know, doing things we do not understand, to processes we do not understand. But that if these processes fail, we will die. And this internalized, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I do feel like there is some level of internalized anxiety that is derived from that.
Anxiety is the word. Aquinas talks about anxiety as the fear of the unseen evil. So you don't know what it is, but you know that it's bad for you.
Exactly.
And precisely because you can't objectify it, it becomes not the object of fear, the way it's like, oh, that's a grizzly bear and it's going to eat me.
No, it's this like, nameless, gnawing dread that at any moment something could go wrong, but you don't know what it is. You don't even have the vocabulary with which to express the kind of fear that just lies around low level all the time.
I'm going to give you a tangible example of this, and then you give me one from your line, because for me, this comes from conversations with the Dohertys, where they look at farming and say, look, this has been the most heavily industrialized part, besides maybe fighting. Growing food has been probably the object of the most...
That's a whole other thing that we can get into.
It has the most industrial inputs, you might say, which meet precisely those conditions you're describing, namely, they are coming from processes which no one person is properly in control of or can understand evenly. Even they are being operated by people who do not know the whole or see the whole and do not even necessarily love the whole. And they are fragile, usually dependent on fossil fuels, which are running out. and usually dependent on the passing on of skill. So what they'll point to is the average age of the farmer, right? As the farming has become more industrialized, less and less and less people have farmed. I mean, it used to be a significant majority of
Most
Americans would have been farming at some scale.
On some level. I mean, even as late as the 20s and 30s, to have a small farm in addition to working a normal job was not unheard of.
Right. But now it's such a bare percentage. I think it was like 5 or 6, if that, of people who are actually like, I'm a farmer. And part of this is because what farming means now is the operation of ginormous military machines.
Exactly.
So not everyone wants to do that, turns out.
Farming means driving a tank.
Yes.
So
this is why people are often confused when they listen to the conservative love for the rural and the sort of nobility of the American, heartland. And then they get out there and it's just some like obscene people blowing things up and screaming around a fire while they're drunk. And it's like, yes, the people. And it is. These are the people. But increasingly, farming attracts the people who love combustion.
Yes.
Because it's a product of combustion.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Combustion and large machinery. That's pretty much farming in a nutshell.
Right. What did you expect? Someone who like loves to feel the loam beneath their feet and smiles at an earthworm as it does its job? Come on. Like,
yeah.
They're
that ain't gonna get it done.
Anyway, so they point out this industrialization and the way that it becomes more and more fragile because when you have so few farmers and the life is so inhuman that you also have a really drastic rate of farmer suicide, and that this isn't like slowing down. This is pretty normal.
As with all things, it's picking up the pace.
And so there's the obvious fear that comes with this. It says, well, if we actually rely on fewer and fewer older and older people who are more and more likely to kill themselves, and that is the source from which we are feeding ourselves, then anxiety is a natural result, I think. And you don't even have to know that. You can just sort of feel that.
I think you can intuit it.
Because if you drive, it's easy. You drive past, 600, 700 acres of corn and just ask, like, how is all this turning into food for everyone? And if you can't immediately answer the question, except by imagining large-scale machinery, then you're alienated from even understanding the means of your own survival. And once you're alienated in that way, you get nervous. I mean, makes sense. So, all right, there's my example.
No, it's a good example. It's a very good example. My example, there's a few that I could jump to that are very easy. Power plants, a nuclear power plant especially. The average person does not understand. I don't understand how, you get from raw radioactive material to power. I know vaguely how you do it with heating up rods and then using the steam to turn a turbine to run a motor that generates electricity. But I don't understand the chemical processes that are involved. I don't understand what kind of safeguards they have. I don't know what a failure would look like or how I would know if one happened. I do know that a failure would be catastrophic. And I know that there is absolutely nothing I can do about it. And I am, for my safety, I lived near a power plant. I say near, within an hour. And as I drove to work, sometimes you would see signs that say, evacuation route in the event of a meltdown. And to pass that sign every day was this constant reminder that there are these people that I don't know doing these things I don't understand, upon whom my survival is dependent.
Yeah, and that's the key. Because I think people can hear this sometimes and think like, okay, you're just frightened of things that are big and like
yes,
but it's that we have these large scale means of providing the means of survival without necessity to it. Like we don't have to live this way.
That would really be what it comes down to, is it doesn't have to be this way. It wasn't this way for most of human history. Your survival was dependent at least partially on your own agency, at least to a majority on your own agency. Now there is just this endless list of things that could happen that you just you probably don't even know about most of them. To give another example, power plants was low-hanging fruit. The chemical processes that are run in factories, is in just several factories. This isn't just in certain locations. It's all over. Anywhere where there is an industrial, some industrial infrastructure, are incredibly dangerous. And I think people kind of know. I mean, I guess if you told somebody chemical plant, they would instantly be like, "Ooh, I don't know about that." But I don't think people maybe know quite how tenuous it is, and how dangerous and volatile some of these things are, to the point that, you know, it's one large scale failure away from a catastrophic explosion that would destroy the landscape beyond recognition. It's one stray tornado away from something pretty bad.
Or, as we got to see here, one train derailment away from.
That's I can't believe I didn't bring that up.
The vinyl chloride.
Yes,
yeah, we're all drinking.
Perfect example. Oddly enough, one of the main ingredients of PVC pipe, which I run quite a bit of.
Yeah, that's right.
Getting back to my own partial culpability in this. But yes, the East Palestine train derailment is a local example that hits home pretty hard. You know, that's one train. It's one derailment of one train. That there are an uncountable number of trains carrying chemical compounds as bad or worse than vinyl chloride that are probably passing who knows how many residential areas at this very moment. And they're not currently derailing, but they will.
Right, which is why we are describing anxiety and not fear. Right?
Exactly.
They're currently
it's not fear.
They're scared of that.
It's anxiety. It is this low-level, ever-present dread.
Yeah.
Every time you see a tanker roll by on the railroad tracks and you think, well, it's not killing me now, but it could.
Yeah, and that anxiety is fueled by the fact that technology is, we imagine it as being fertile. What I mean is, we very deliberately describe, like, iPhones, for instance, as coming in generations, right? As if the father iPhone generates like from like, and we get another iPhone, right? Or we'll talk about technology evolving, right? So it goes from this sort of primitive
primal iPhone.
Yes. And then it develops into now. And of course, there's a lot that can be said in terms of this imaginary idea that it's always going to get better and better, right? Sure. That's the Enlightenment narrative here. But what strikes me about our will to speak of our technological world as being fertile is that it is obviously not true. Man passes down technology to man, right?
Yes.
And what this means is that it is not simply the case that we can expect any given technology to be maintained in the future as well as it is in the present. In fact, in all likeliness, we should probably expect it to be maintained less well going forward into the future.
Yes.
Than it was when it was first created, because if, as you say, all of this infrastructure relies on people to actually fix it, and people to actually problem solve it, and to maintain it at all, then when we ask the question of what will this dangerous technology hurt us? Will this useful technology continue to be useful? Will this bridge that's holding up these semi trucks, never collapse? We get so caught up in the idea that it's the things, the products that are doing it, that we forget to look at the human person and say, okay, as essential as the load-bearing capacity of concrete is the capacity of a son who does not know the load-bearing capacity of concrete to receive that information from a father, right? It might be his actual father, right? Or it might be someone above him, but someone who has the information, the learning, the knowledge, the skill necessary for the maintenance of the technological infrastructure. There has to be a successful moment of communion by which the one passes down to the other. This is the real fertility of technology that we're trying to get at when we talk about, iPhone generations or whatever. It's that it does require fertility. It requires the generation of skill in someone who doesn't have it from someone who does. Now, when we talk about that, when we consider that as a necessary part of infrastructure, then what we're really saying is that we need ideal conditions by which the knowledge of the past is passed down to the future, right? We need the best possible cultural conditions by which sons desire to be like their fathers, by which the young receive willingly the wisdom of the old and even the know-how of the old. And what terrifies me about the technological state that we have built is that precisely to the degree that we build a technologically dependent society, we degrade those very human conditions by which the maintenance of that technology is passed down from father to son. I mean, you notice this, right? Like the farming, again, is an example.
Sure.
The farmer's son looks at his industrial farming parents and says, I want none of that, right? It is infertile. No matter what fertility you've managed to squeeze out of the fields, you have not managed to make the skills and the know-how of the one generation generate literally in the next. And the crisis is obvious, namely very few farmers, very old farmers, very depressed farmers. And
the crisis it's similar in trade work. The average age of trade workers has continued to climb. It's been high since I entered the trades, and we're just not getting replaced.
Right. And I think when people say these things like, oh, people don't want to work anymore, they're onto something, but they keep on placing it at this kind of like,
they're right for the wrong reasons.
Right. They're just like, well, it's laziness. And
that's the thing. They skip straight to the bugbears of American culture, of laziness, sloth.
Right. But it's like, what we don't see is that if it's the case that the next generation does not want the work of the last generation, then the crisis is in the generation that currently has the skills. Like, why is it that we are not able to generate into the next generation? Why are we literally contracepted so that we build these large scale machines, these large scale systems, and then bemoan the seeming inability for anyone to step up and say, I will maintain them, right? I will learn the skill. But it's frustrating because one of the most obvious reasons is automation. Why? Because if the very things we're building are increasingly automated, then they're increasingly likely to create in the people who maintain them characters that no one wants to be. So what I mean is, like, look, it's one thing to say, what a tragedy. The father was a carpenter with all of this skill and all of this know-how, and the son looked at the father and said, I don't want any of that, right? I want something else. Now that's a tragedy. Okay.
Yes.
But if the father is someone who pushes a button, right? And again, betraying my lack of knowledge of automation within carpentry here, but insert automated process, then there's nothing in the father that, intrinsic to his work anyways, that the son looks at it and says, I want to be that. Father, give me what was past that I might take it into the present. That condition I described, in which the past moves into the present, is the only conditions in which we can possibly say, yes, this industrial system's big, it's complex, but don't worry, because there's such a love of the younger for the older. There's such a desire. Like, we really do believe that this is all good for us, and we really want to keep it going, keep doing it. So don't worry, because the young will take from the old. There is a burning desire
to keep it going.
We'll maintain those power plants, and we'll maintain those rail lines. And they love the trains that are carrying the vinyl chloride, and they will take care of them because there is a passionate desire to be like the father in the sense. Okay, that is the condition where we can say, okay, yeah, we've got a technological state. It's a little bit big, but don't worry. And that is obviously, I'm being dramatic.
Yeah, sure.
Not the condition we live in.
No, that would be the opposite of the condition that we live in.
Because the very systems we intend on building are the systems that make people boring.
Yeah.
And no one wants to be boring.
Everyone can, yeah. No one wants to do that. We've built a bunch of stuff that requires people to do things they just don't want to do.
Right. And then
you can force people to do things they don't want to do using various carrot and stick approaches for a while, but eventually people are just going to say, I'm kind of done with this.
Exactly. You've just said it, which is that all that's left to you is coercion.
Yeah.
So once you get rid of the fecundity of generation to generation, you have to say like, okay, we can't get the kids to work, so starve them.
Exactly.
And
I mean, you can see the slow degradation of generation from I wish to pass on this skill to you that is an intrinsic part of who I am to I wish to pass on to you the knowledge that if you do not attain some skill, you won't be able to afford a car.
Totally.
To please do this. We really need people to work. And they're like, nah, I'm out.
Yeah.
You know, it goes from take this thing that is a part of me to this like veiled threat of if you want to live a comfortable material life, you are going to have to do something like I did. To now where it's just a mess entirely.
No, right. No, I think you're right. Like the first thing is the image going from the father to the son. The second thing is passing on the wisdom of what kind of coercion they're facing out there. To say, son, you got to get this job to make it, and you should do it for your family. Okay, that's generation 2. Generation 3 is the guy who just did it to make it for his family, but now
it wasn't worth it.
Those goods are degraded, right? And yeah, especially then you have the degradation of even those goods that you were extrinsically attempting to get, like family, and so then the third generation looks and says, no, I don't want it.
It's
and even I would say there's even this case where you know, like here with families that have been on welfare, it's intergenerational as well. So we think of it as this like crisis of, well, they can't find work, but that's not the case. Fathers give, in my experience here in this area, fathers give the wisdom of determining to go on welfare as opposed to a job to their sons.
Sure.
And they imitate in that way, and it makes total sense because
it really does.
If you don't make over $16 an hour here, you might as well be on welfare. And guess what? Any job, like well, those jobs aren't really there. It's
no,
the problem.
I mean, this just doesn't exist
unless you have great geographic mobility, which again, poverty seems
to
preclude in the first place.
Yeah. Okay. We need you to be a traveling worker. We will not provide you a means of travel. You need to provide your own means of travel and also be in Wyoming in about 2 days.
Yeah, right.
It's. I had a thought, and it
just seems to me like sometimes it can seem really romantic or idealist to describe a no growth policy, to say no. The problem is that we are attempting to carve out the means of survival in a manner which accrues capital at a really high level. And because this is an implicit goal in all our operations, we're doing things that are far too complex, right? Like the reason that we can't even conceive of the idea of limiting our consumption, of having, just like wood stoves instead of electric grids, of having basically a sort of a more a means of survival that more depends on us and a direct or a more communal relationship to the surrounding environment. Okay, the reason that this has been sort of impossible is because we've built up a world in which when we go about our survival, we're always also doing something else, which is profiting capital. We're always involved in systems where that is the other goal. And where we can get rid of that goal, then you can see older forms of life as being possible. But wherever we still have that goal as part of the structure for society, then we really can't. But it often gets seen as romantic that you're going to pull back, that you're going to do something simpler, that you're not going to get in the rat race, that you're going to, consume less, live with less, do less. And it's seen as a sort of, a weak and cowardly backing away from the full demands of the day. Let's just say that. But what I hope is clear to people listening to you is that that kind of life that's very simple is also the kind of life that's very sustainable, in the sense that the kinds of activities it demands from people are character forming. They're not automated processes that you push button start for the sake of a wage. They are not ways of acting like machines for the sake of payment, but they are work that procures for you the means of survival and makes you into a certain kind of person. And I'm not trying to be overly complex here. I'm saying it makes you strong. It makes your body strong. It gives you certain skills with your hands, from splitting wood to planting seeds to
that have an obvious utility.
Yeah. And that when a younger generation looks to an older generation, they see in it something imitatable, right?
Sure.
Whereas, to go back to the beginning of our conversation, someone that is simply in marketing, even though extrinsically they might be the best dad in the world to their kids, or the best, elder figure to their neighborhood, insofar as their work is considered, no one knows what they do, and it's not apparent in their body, it's not apparent in their habits, it's not apparent in their skills. I mean, with computer guys, this is actually pretty sad, because if you did computers 10 years ago, you don't even have the right language anymore to pass on skills. Like, what are you going to do? Pass on the old forms of coding? No, it's done. It's over. So
which brings a whole nother layer into the passing on of knowledge. As technology, develops in an exponential way, there's not time. We've outstripped our ability to pass on knowledge entirely.
Right. And so the movement to call them older systems, but it's really systems of procuring the means of survival that are at the same time, at one and the same time, character building, is not what's the word? Sort of a libertarian, get off the grid kind of motivation. The motivation is actually, okay, how do we create systems that aren't so fragile? Right? Because what's the point of saying, well, I guess the point is that you can make a bunch of money right now and not care about the future.
Yeah, if you have no concern for the broader future, now is the time to act.
Yes.
Make your money. But yeah, I think it's inconceivable to, I say inconceivable, at least hard to imagine, even, for me, for anyone, that society was relatively stable for, thousands of years with only slow and measured progress in any given area. And that what multiple generations of your family, going as far back as you could think, did roughly the same thing you did. And now generation to generation is almost unrecognizable.
Yeah, this is, I forget who it was that said this is the sign of a revolutionary age. It might have been Belloc, that someone at the end of his life has nothing to give to someone at the beginning of his life.
And we have reached that point. We have reached the point where, and, we bemoan the lack of respect for elders and things of that nature, but we've constructed a system in which the elderly have nothing to give us.
Right.
All of their information is out of date.
Right.
We have put an expiration date on our own selves.
Right. Right.
After a certain point, if you cannot attain whatever new knowledge they have decided you need to get, if you pass that point where you can easily soak up the developments, they're not really worthwhile.
Yes. Yeah. And so I think the call to cease the maintenance of growth as a goal, and to ask instead for the maintenance of generation. Okay, what best serves the continuation of life from one generation to the next? When that becomes the goal, then you start to, I think, see the sense of what might otherwise seem like very radical, out there ideas.
Sure.
This is something we're always struggling with, is from the perspective of modernity, which is an insane place.
It is.
Then we sound insane. Sort of radical. But when the things we're advocating are things like, growing food, it's that's probably the least radical. I mean, etymologically it is radical, but besides that, it's the least radical thing you can imagine. This is what people did. Can you imagine if they didn't know about modernity, if you, showed up in 13th century and were yeah, I'm pretty cool. I'm a urban gardener. What? Who is this guy?
Yeah. What are you doing here? Yeah. Modernity from the outside looking in is quite an insane place, in which we've abandoned all static values for eternal fluidity.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and for the profit of some and not all, I think.
Yes, for the profit of very few.
Yeah. Well, I hope you're all good and depressed. Sandy, any words of hope for us here before we and I'll try to summarize, and then we can maybe give you the last word, which is basically that there is a degradation of work in our culture across the board. And it's seen in the alienation of man from his work, so that it becomes a means to an end, and the work itself is not dignified and for the sake of, it's not a good in itself. It's just a means to an end. That's all. And this involves the imitation of machines, for which this is normal, right? Because they're machines.
Sure. That's what they're made for.
And the attempt to be like machines basically leads to the creation of two extremes, right? A class of people who can keep up, and a class of people who either can't or deem it not worth their while to even try. And that this increasingly forms a structure of our sort of political scene, and that it is in no way the case that we're just going one way or the other, as it were, like precisely because the effort is still towards automation at a greater and greater scale. We are constantly producing this binary of workaholism and no work on either side. And that big part of why we're doing this is because we have to, because we have built machines that cannot be maintained apart from passing on knowledge and skill as means of our survival. And yet no one wants to maintain them because the work stinks. And so we have baked into the pie, as it were, the necessity of means of coercion, hard and soft, to make sure people still maintain the means of our survival. Because at the end of the day, no matter who you are, you don't want to die.
Yeah, more or less.
And I guess just finally, that then part of the solution to this is to slow down, to back off, to find new ways and old ways of...
Find ideas so old they look like new.
Yeah. Procuring the means of survival such that we can assure to a greater extent generational continuity as opposed to generational disruption and just the constant production of anxiety as a means of life. That's my summary of what we talked about.
That's a pretty good summary. I think it's pretty good.
So leave us with something hopeful, because you know what? There's God, there's grace, there's his angels, there's his saints, and so can't all be bleak.
No, it's not bleak. Never forget that Christ incarnated as a man, and the incarnation changes everything. Yeah. And that Christ worked with his hands, and that there is value and inherent worth in work, so long as the work is well ordered. And, learn a skill, apply it with responsibility, and try insofar as you're able in whatever station of life you're in to find a way to do that, no matter how small it may seem. It's been a great blessing when I've been able to use the skills I've acquired in a way that brings glory to God, and, fully realizes my humanity in a way that a lot of it hasn't. Mm-hmm. And so that would be my thing. Don't bow out just yet. Don't. It's tempting. I understand, but if no one makes the effort to change the culture, then it will not be changed.
Yeah,
it will just inevitably hurtle towards collapse, and there will be no one standing in the way to stop it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I said I'd give you the last word, but I won't, because I guess I'm an egoist. It's always the goods, right, that people wave in front of us in order to get us to do things. At the end of the day, no matter how shallow they are, how wrong we are about the order of things, like, we've found no way to move humanity except by images of the good. And I think that, at least for me, is a sign of sort of overarching hope.
Yeah.
That and the challenge for us today is to be very honest about those goods. Like, okay, is this work really fulfilling what I want? Like, am I really getting to be with my family? Am I really getting the kinds of goods that make me happy? Or am I working for enough money because I have a fear and I need as much security as I can in money, or because I'm addicted to luxury goods and I'm after a jet ski for no reason. Like, the Catholic tradition of the examination of conscience needs to be applied to work.
It should,
and it
very much should.
It's not just about like feeling bad about ourselves, like getting guilty because somehow we're, contributing to an unjust system. We are in an unjust system. We can all agree on that. Right? We can get over that. But the question is, how often are we lying to ourselves? I mean, the examination of conscience is to look at the truth that we already know and just to be brave enough to look at it and say, in this work that I'm doing, is it really the case that I can't do anything else? Honestly, is it really the case that I'm just totally stuck, right? Or am I too afraid to make the right move? Am I too afraid to give up luxury goods? Am I too afraid to take less? Am I too afraid to live simply?
I was actually going to say something somewhat similar as I heard you talking. It's like, yeah, don't be afraid. I mean, you will have to prioritize the capital G good and all of the goods that are reflections of the capital G good, and attempt to see through the obfuscations of everything dangled in front of you. And yeah, sometimes that means some discomfort, but it's okay. You'll be fine.
Yeah. And if you're not, you'll be dead. And then, hey,
yeah,
that's great to be in heaven.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I prioritize your family, prioritize your kids, however you can, do whatever you can to do so. And I suppose this is a bit rote, but it's important, evangelize. The number one thing to do would be to change people's hearts. If you change a super majority of people's hearts, then we start to make a change.
All right, everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to Mr. Pearson here. I hope to have you on again, Sam. Thank you very much.
I'd love to.
Yeah, whenever we need to rant about the perils of industrial society, I'll bring you on and we'll make it happen. Yeah. All right, have a good day, everyone. God bless.